I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1950. Emma and Jerry Montgomery are my great-grandparents. I live with my grandparents. Their son Bishop and his wife Mary had a home in Selma, the famous 1519 Hayden Street. Onita is the youngest daughter of Bishop and Mary, and she was teaching in Mobile, Alabama. Papa, my grandfather, asked her to come home to live in the house with them. And so Michael, Mama, and I packed up and moved to Selma. Everybody came to our house. I met untold number of people like Lydia Stalwart. Lydia used to come, and she was bigger than life. Another person that used to come was Cousin Charlie, he would come often. And because my grandfather was my best friend, I was always on the foot. So whoever came to that door, I'm there to greet them. And it would be these various different cousins. My grandfather Bishop moved from Beatrice, Alabama, or Monroeville, and brought his children because they had completed their education as far as they could go there. And in Selma, we had Payne University, and there was Snow Hill, and some of the other, what we would consider high school / early college. And my mother, Onita, attended Payne University, where she played basketball, spoke Latin, and she did all kinds of different things. Mabel was a teacher at Payne. Mabel is Benny McRae's mother. She was a wordsmith. She was a brilliant teacher. She was the other teacher I had. My grandfather had retired, but he sold Blair products, and he was a carpenter. And my grandmother was older, but she continued to teach in a one-room schoolhouse. So education was premier in the Montgomery family. My grandparents were Methodists, and my mom became a Catholic in the 1940s. When she came back to Selma, she did not go back into education. She worked at the library in the office of Edmondite Mission. And books were my playmates, and National Geographics were my comic books, if you will. The globes of the world and those kinds of things sparked my desire to learn about the world. Upon completing elementary school in Selma, St. Elizabeth Elementary School, there was no high school for Catholics there. My mom sent my brother and I to St. Jude in Montgomery, Alabama. And after that, I moved to Holy Rosary boarding school in Lafayette, Louisiana, because as a girl, I could not be in the city of Montgomery alone with families. There was no boarding situation in Montgomery. The next year, my senior year, my cousin Lawrence McRae and his family lived in Riverside, California. And he called my mom and asked her if I could come and go to school out there. St. Francis de Sales High School, which was an all-girls Catholic school. I was the only African-American in the class of 70 senior girls.
So the big difference between California and
Yes.
Alabama and Louisiana was that you went to an all-white school in California and you were in segregated schools in Alabama and Louisiana.
In California, St. Francis de Sales was primarily Mexican, blacks, and some whites. My concern was that as an African American, I was attending school for the first time with Caucasian children. So my quote unquote protection was, well, at least maybe the Mexican kids would like me. And I never had that thought before because I was never thrown into a situation with Caucasian children after going through the civil rights movement. I had a great senior year and had no problem staying in the top 5%.
Did you find the Latino girls to be allies?
They were equal. As a matter of fact, I ended up staying with a Mexican family. The father was white and mom was 100% Mexican, both Spanish most of the time when she was upset. I was accepted right away. And of course, that was my fear. I was just at ease. And I had a 3-year scholarship to Los Angeles Hospital School of Nursing. However, my mother and brother were at that time in Georgia, and mom said I had to come home because it was just too far away for her. We had a connection with Albany State College at that time in Albany, Georgia. Our cousin Billy Black was the chemist there. Mama would attend extension classes. She stayed in college after college. And my brother, when he graduated from St. Jude, attended Albany State. And therefore, I ended up going to Albany State. And I majored in nursing and graduated and worked at Phoebe Putney Hospital. I'd married Terry Steele Sr. He decided that he was going back into the Army. He was assigned to Augusta, and I, of course, wanted to continue working. So I was the charge nurse at University Hospital in Augusta. 20 years later and 52 years of marriage, we are a military retired family. So I worked until he got deployed to Germany. And once he went to Germany, he said, well, that's the end of your career because we're going to be a family living in Germany. And at that time, I was 7 months pregnant with our second child. We moved to Kaiserslautern, Germany, known as K-Town. We spent half of the tour there, and they moved us to Darmstadt and then back to the States. And about every 2 to 3 years, 3 years or so, we were moving from place to place. And I never returned to medicine, but as a volunteer for 17 years, I did not work. I was a parent. We ended up having 4 children. Therefore, I was a classroom mom. I did everything, possible to be supportive of the children.
You went from the Deep South to a Latin-infused culture in California.
Exactly.
Back to the Deep South,
yes.
to Europe, back to the U.S. in the South and the North, back to Europe. I guess, when you have that kind of broad experience, it changes you.
Absolutely.
What are some of the most important lessons you feel you learned from having all of those cultural experiences?
Well, the first thing I learned being born and raised as a Catholic by Caucasian priests and nuns from the North was a respect and an understanding that all Caucasians were not the same. Where I grew up in Selma, I knew who the 2 grand wizards in their red hoods owned our stores on Broad Street and encountered a lot of straight hate, if you would. And I began to challenge that, Cheryl, at age 11. I drank out of the white-only water fountain at Woolworth store, or Crest, we're not sure what the name was. And I was challenged by the men, and they asked me, Gal, don't you know how to read? I said, what do you mean, do I know how to read? I'm 11 years old. And that pride came in. And I said, of course I can read it. She said, what does that sign say? I said, it says white only. Why did you drink out of it? Because it was a water fountain. And it was right. Well, the other one is black only. And I knew that my life was in peril right that moment. But for some reason, they just said, okay, Gal, get out of here and leave. And I made it out alive. That store is right at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The fear of growing up in Selma, we knew we had streets of all black businesses, cobblestone roads, doctors, nurses. The professors were the high school teachers, and we never envisioned anyone bothering us. My mother voted in the 1950s. I would be the one that would walk and stand on the sidewalk in front of that fire station, terrified that she would never come out of there. They used the poll tax. against her, but she was obviously quite literate, and they did not have to read the ballot to her. However, the Caucasians that could not read, they would read the ballot to them while she was in there. And she would come out and we would go and continue our day. And she would vote at every opportunity, which it's said that a few Black people were allowed to vote. I became a member of the movement at age 11. I attended my very first mass meeting with my mom. And I was just so taken aback about the bravery of the people that were speaking. They were Selma people. They talked about the need to have pride in yourself and your community. There were other churches that were involved in the movement prior to Martin Luther King and people coming to town. We had started the movement due to an incident that took place with a young woman attempting to get on the city bus. The bus driver was quite nasty and he pulled off. She fell and she lost her baby. To get the young people involved, we were determined that there would never be another city bus to run in Selma, Alabama. And to this day, there has never been one.
When you parallel back to Africa, some of the children led the anti-apartheid movement.
That was the parallel.
And there were very young people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Family first, church, education, community. You could not have education without helping others. That's what my grandfather, my mom, and all of their children in some way taught me. As a child, I would be sent to visit and stay with some of them, from Birmingham to Oak Hill, Alabama, also Selma. I had the pleasure of living with educators from all backgrounds, from having a little farm to teaching the children in the community, to the brick and mortar schools in Selma and the one-room schoolhouse. So Papa taught us and Grandmary that once you are educated, then you have the obligation to tell the stories, your history as a family, the pride, devotion to one another, uplifting people in the community, and just being a general good citizen. And I think that's what I remember the most about being blessed to be raised in the home of very aged grandparents.
They were born during Reconstruction, just after the Civil War. So there were people that were still living the life of enslaved people when they were young children. So that had to have influenced their behavior and perceptions.
In flight from Monrovia area.
They wanted to leave that history behind.
And I have subsequently met family members. One that's passed on, her name was Gwendolyn Holiday, and she told me, she lived in Michigan, Detroit, I believe, that her grandfather took them north and told them never to come to the South. But there have been others that have told us the same stories because it was such a difficult time. And, that's one of the misconceptions that I wrote about when I was preparing today, is they thought that Black men in particular left the South and to find their way and left their families, therefore splitting the families. But their goal was to make life better and find work, schooling, and whatever was necessary, and to send for the families to come later. And that did not happen for all of the people that went north during the Great Migration. Yes, I believe that is some of the reasons that we have been separated. Some were able to be very, very successful. Others were okay, but we're not afforded the opportunities of advanced education. Having taught school for 20 years here in Georgia, the divide between the haves and have-nots and the educated and quote-unquote uneducated, or I call educated people without degrees, has been a real difficult place for many of us to try to explain, especially to people that want us divided.
History has become much maligned.
If you rob a person or a group or a nation of books, of history, of creativity, of storytelling, then you will not grow. There's no way that the United States of America is going to go back to 1619. That is our responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen.
If you came back to life 100 years from now, what would you want to tell those future generations about our past?
I want them to understand and respect their roots on the continent of Africa. It is a continent of countries with diverse people. I believe it's 54 countries now, but the countries were renamed once they were invaded. The lines that were drawn between the countries that separated us put us in with people that did not speak the same language. And I was really affected by seeing the slave ship, the Henrietta Marie, in a museum in Tallahassee, Florida, and the life-size bodies of slaves. So I want them to venerate, to learn about the continent, but not to buy into the fact that we were just thrown away people because we had no say-so in coming to America. And so I want young people to believe, to trust, but to study. Then what do you do with that information? You build upon your self-pride to focus on being successful in whatever walk of life you choose. Do your best. And I think that is the story of the diverse Montgomery family, certainly of Jerry and Emma, Bishop and Mary, and children of Jerry and Emma.
You would want future generations to have the pride
Yes.
of our African ancestry and the diversity that ancestry has yielded.
Just